And once we get into the clarification period, this is the time where we take the best value vendor and clearly we can see exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it, which means the list of requirements of activities that goes on in a clarification period, that's not under discussion. The first thing is, depending on the complexity of the job and the vendor we selected is the expert vendor. The expert vendor now takes the responsibility to identify how long this clarification period must be. Why? Because if they need more time than what the client is looking at giving them, we have a contested environment. If the subject matter experts who thought they had a better solution come into this clarification period and say, well, we think it should be this, that's a contested environment. Once you have a contested environment, you don't have a best value environment. It's just the way it is. So if you look at, quote, the activities and the deliverables of the best value vendor during this time, it should be a very clear, detailed schedule. And it should sync up with, quote, the simplified milestone schedule, which has the major factors incorporated in there, which is time, cost. And it should be simple for the clients because I have not seen clients who don't have a simplified look at this. I have not seen clients who have subject matter experts who actually understand the project. Simple. I've seen a lot of subject matter experts who represent a client who seem to have expertise. But once they see a true expert who actually understands the project walk in the room, the subject matter experts say very little. It's because they actually know now that there is an expert who knows the project. And if the expert doesn't know the project that well, they're not truly an expert. So they must have the detailed schedule, which can be quickly checked, against a simplified milestone schedule, which any of the client's representatives who don't even understand the project can see what's going on and what should happen. You can't move on. Both have to be in sync. And people then say, well, if the vendor's expert representative can explain in detail what's going on, it's just not going to work out. So therefore, we're going to have a full technical review. And the expert who represents the expert vendor has to bring as much information as any of the subject matter experts are requesting. They have to answer all questions. They have to identify exactly why they're proposing that the schedule is as such. And they also have to be able to ask questions on what is required from the client's experts that's not there yet. Well, it's very straightforward. Either it's not there or it's there. And so we don't have any, quote, biased or contested information or individuals who are saying, well, we don't have enough information. Really, what do we have? We have a full technical review by the subject matter experts. Once you have this, we know who the expert is. Every information that was requested from the expert vendor by anyone else should be observable. And now we have, quote, the weekly risk report, which is the simplified schedule. Now, I didn't say that it had to be, quote, complete detail wise. It just has to be simple, that anybody who is not an expert can understand what the expert vendor is saying. Simple. Yeah, we just had a project that some of the clients' people, when asked, where is your weekly risk report? They said, oh, we don't use one. What? You don't use one? They go, oh, because the information is on our ERP system and it's all over the place. Well, how is that simple? The objective of the weekly risk report is to make it simple, which means it has to be in one place. So when somebody asks a question on the project, it's simple because somebody who's not an expert on a project can quickly go and say, there's the number. We know what it is. The cost and time deviation, there it is. That is why we put that weekly risk report together, so it would make it simple. So anybody could ask a question and they didn't have to wait a whole week to get their response. So the weekly risk report has to be the weekly risk report where if two people are sitting in the room, one represented the client and the other one represented the vendor, that if the client's representative had a question, the vendor's person could quickly pull the information off the weekly risk report. Remember, the objective of the weekly risk report is to make sure that it's simple enough that everybody understands exactly what the project performance is. And I guess it was partly my fault because, I didn't clearly explain this before. The objective of the weekly risk report is not to make sure that all the information on a project is on one document. No, it's to make it simple so that somebody who is not technically based, who had a lot of experience with the project, can find the information. No, it has to be the document makes understanding of the project simple because it's in one place using numerics that everyone can see on a document, which is the weekly risk report. I guess we just didn't make it clear enough. The weekly risk report should have as an objective to make the project simple. And basically, once it's that simple and everybody understands how simple it is and how simple the weekly risk report is, that is why it provides the vendor with a project that's uncontested, because nobody can argue with the vendor. It provides simple information that can be easily updated and answered from using the weekly risk report. And therefore, we have a new procurement system that BVA brings, and we have a new project management model, which the BVA brings. What's the new project management model? It is that the project is managed by the expert vendor. That's the new model. And why is the cost much lower? Because it's uncontested. Uncontested means instead of having 20 parties who are looking at the project, how many parties are actually looking at the project? One. And he uses the weekly risk report. And therefore, what he says is not contestable. My goodness. We didn't see it that simple before. Uncontested means there's only one person now who needs to get the information, and that information has to be observable. And it comes from the weekly risk report. Remember, all the information that's used in the procurement portion of BVA has to be simple, has to be observable, which means everybody must agree because everybody can observe it. And that information and that philosophy moves right into the actual execution of the project. You know, I used to think unlike an ERP system, that's very complicated, right? People would say, well, you don't understand how the execution of an ERP installation is. And I used to say, oh, I don't. Boy, I used to get really nervous. Then I thought about it. I said, that's ridiculous. If you can't portray the requirements of an ERP system on a simple document, and we can't find who the best value vendor is from past experience because they've already done this somewhere, and we can verify this, I'm sorry, then we don't need to be running the best value approach here, simply because it's not a uncontested environment. It's contested. There's an expert over here, an expert over there, and they're doing this. Now, I understand there are a lot of people who don't like this approach because when it's uncontested, it means we need what? Less people. And immediately, some people are going to feel, quote, left out. They're going to feel like their job is no longer needed. I hate to say this. When something is clear and dominant and it's uncontested, we don't need a lot of people. People worried about this? Absolutely. But I'm sorry, that's the honest truth about a running of a best value environment where all the information is clear and observable, and you don't need any technical knowledge of what's going on during the procurement. But during the clarification period, anyone can ask questions and anyone can identify, quote, that the expert vendor didn't know something. That's fine. But once it's brought up and the expert vendor is, quote, asked the question, why did you not consider this? Or will it work here? Once they can answer that question, we need fewer subject matter experts. Yeah, I even bought into the idea when we first started this that everyone in the procurement office had to understand what the best value approach is. I no longer agree with that approach. I don't even think education of everybody in an office is needed. And I'm sorry if some people are offended because they no longer feel like their services are not valued. But the best value approach needs very few people to understand and very few people to run. And that is why the cost of the system is very low. And that is why the accuracy of the system is very high. It's because we minimize the number of people who are actually needed. And it's the truth. I used to wonder why I made so many people nervous. And that is why.